You boys are done.
Ma'am, I need to see your ID.
Here it is. You have no reason to detain me.
Just doing my job. Please remain calm.
I know my rights.
I'm a federal magistrate judge, Northern District of Georgia. This is my judicial ID. Sure you are, ma'am. Hands on the vehicle right now. There was no punch in that moment. No shattered glass, no screaming crowd, no dramatic chase. Just something colder and more dangerous. The certainty of authority when it decides the truth doesn't matter. Picture it clearly because this actually happens in America. A black woman stands under harsh fluorescent lights at a Circle K after 2 a.m., pumping gas with shaking hands she's forcing to stay steady. She tells the deputies she's a federal judge. She shows credentials. She offers to verify everything, and they laugh in her face like she just tried to sell them a fake Rolex. Then they cuff her, they book her, they slap on suspicious activity, and when that sounds too vague to survive daylight, they pivot to resisting, and 36 hours later, 36 those same deputies walk into court for their own civil rights trial, and she's the one in the robe behind the bench. That is exactly what happened to Forsyth County deputies Dominic Augustine and John Mueller, and what they didn't know what turns this from ugly to unbearable was that Judge Sarah Blacksmith had just spent the worst night of her life in an ICU waiting room, saying goodbye to her dying mother. Sarah Blacksmith wasn't expecting to spend her Saturday night in a jail cell. At 47, the federal magistrate judge for the Northern District of Georgia had built a reputation over 23 years for fairness, precision, and a calm so steady it made people choose their words more carefully in her courtroom. She had presided over drug conspiracies, immigration hearings, and complex federal litigation. She'd stared down cartel attorneys and DOJ prosecutors without flinching. But at 2:17 a.m. on a cold February morning, none of that mattered. The ICU family waiting room at Piedmont Atlanta Hospital smelled like industrial cleaner and burnt coffee. Sarah sat in a vinyl chair that squeaked every time she shifted her weight. Her mother's favorite blanket folded across her lap like a fragile promise. Dr. Phillips had delivered the words with that careful, practiced compassion that doctors learn when they've said them too many times. Hours, maybe a day. The cancer had won. Evelyn Blacksmith, 71, former elementary school teacher, church choir director, the woman who worked 2 jobs to send her daughter to Howard Law slipping away. Sarah hadn't cried yet. Somewhere early in her legal career she'd learned that tears were a luxury she couldn't afford in courtrooms where every emotion could be weaponized. But sitting alone in that waiting room, listening to the second hand drag itself forward, something cracked inside her chest. 18 hours earlier she'd thrown on the first clothes she could find when the hospital called, black leggings, an old Howard Law sweatshirt with a fraying collar, white sneakers. Her hair normally pinned in a neat bun beneath her robe hung loose around her shoulders. No makeup, no jewelry except a small gold cross her mother had given her at law school graduation. She looked nothing like the judge who'd sentenced a corrupt police chief just 3 weeks earlier. A memory rose up, sharp and unwanted. Sarah at 12 years old in the back seat of her mother's Buick during a traffic stop in rural Georgia. The officer had made Evelyn step out, made her open the trunk, made her explain why she was driving through a white neighborhood. Sarah remembered watching her mother's hands shake as she produced her teacher's ID, her voice steady even as humiliation burned in her eyes. That memory shaped everything: law school, the bar exam, the relentless climb, every case Sarah ever presided over. Every time she reminded herself, this is why the law matters. And now, leaving the hospital at 1:43 a.m., her fuel light blinked insistent and unforgiving on the dashboard of her Mercedes. She took the exit for Forsyth County. The GPS guided her to a Circle K off GA 400, its fluorescent lights slicing through the February darkness like cold knives. The station sat isolated at the edge of the highway, an island of harsh white light surrounded by empty fields. A Waffle House glowed amber in the distance, warm and far away. Sarah pulled up to pump 7. The engine ticked as it cooled. She stepped out into air that smelled faintly of diesel and winter, unscrewed the cap, swiped her card, and began pumping gas. Her mind replayed the hospital room, her mother's labored breathing, machines that beeped and hissed, the nurse who squeezed her shoulder and said nothing because there was nothing left to say. Then headlights swept across the lot. Sarah glanced up. A patrol car circled slowly, deliberately, predatory, assessing. It completed a full loop before pulling in behind her Mercedes, blocking her exit like it was sealing a door. 2 deputies stepped out. The first was tall, mid-40s, crew cut, jaw carved from stone. His nameplate read Augustine. The second was younger, softer around the middle, hand resting near his belt by the taser Mueller. Augustine approached with a flashlight, the beam lancing directly into Sarah's eyes. She lifted a hand to shield her face. The pump clicked off behind her. He stopped 3 feet away, flashlight steady, expression flat. Mueller flanked him to the right, silent and watchful. Sarah moved slowly, deliberately. She reached for her wallet, extracted her federal judicial credentials, the laminated card catching the fluorescent light, and held it up between 2 fingers. The ID was clear. Federal Magistrate Judge Sarah Blacksmith, Northern District of Georgia. Her voice was calm, measured, the same voice she used when swearing in witnesses. Augustine's eyes flicked to the ID, then back to her face. Then he laughed. Not a small chuckle. A full, open laugh that carried across an empty parking lot. He turned to Mueller and gestured at the credentials still held between Sarah's fingers, like he was sharing a joke. Mueller grinned, said nothing. Sarah kept her hand extended. She offered additional verification bar card, clerk's office number, whatever they needed. The offer hung in the air between them like a lifeline they refused to touch. Augustine stepped closer. His boots scraped the concrete. Hands on the vehicle. Sarah's pulse thrummed in her ears, but her hand stayed steady. She placed her credentials back in her wallet, set the wallet on the hood of the car, turned slowly, and placed her palms flat against the cold metal. Mueller moved in and patted her down, swift, impersonal, invasive under the unblinking eye of the gas station security camera. Across the lot, a figure outside the Waffle House watched. Augustine declared she was under arrest for suspicious activity. Sarah said evenly that suspicious activity wasn't a criminal charge. The charge shifted to resisting. She said she hadn't resisted, it didn't matter. Augustine pulled her arms behind her back. The cuffs clicked into place, cold, tight, biting into her wrists. As they walked her toward the patrol car, Sarah recited the words silently like a mantra, an anchor. The right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects, against unreasonable searches and seizures, shall not be violated. Mueller opened the back door. Sarah ducked her head and climbed inside. The seat was hard plastic. The air smelled of sweat and disinfectant, and as Augustine closed the door, he turned to Mueller and raised his hand. A high five. Sharp, triumphant, captured in the night by a ring camera mounted near the Waffle House entrance, recording silently forever. And Sarah Blacksmith, federal magistrate judge, sat in the back of a patrol car, staring through the glass at fluorescent light, knowing her mother was dying miles away, while two deputies celebrated like they'd just won something. The Forsyth County Detention Center looked exactly like the kind of place that never expected to hold someone like Sarah Blacksmith, because it was designed around one assumption: whoever came through those doors deserved to be there. It was a squat concrete building that smelled like mildew, bleach, and old sweat trapped in cinder block. The air was too cold. The lights were too bright. Everything was built to remind you that comfort wasn't part of the process. Sarah was processed at 3:11 a.m. Fingerprints, mugshot, property inventory. Her wallet, her keys, her phone, the small gold cross she wore, everything was taken, bagged and sealed in a plastic pouch with a barcode like she was evidence, not a person. No one made eye contact long enough to see her as anything other than arrestee. She said it again, calm, measured, professional. I am a federal magistrate judge. My credentials can be verified. The booking officer barely looked up. Not rude, not angry, just indifferent, like truth was something that required paperwork, and paperwork could wait. They led her down a hallway that echoed with distant metal noises, doors, locks, the clank of someone else being moved like cargo. Then they opened a cell, 8 feet by 10, a metal bench bolted to the wall, a toilet in the corner with no seat, a sink with a weak trickle of water that smelled metallic. Overhead, a fluorescent light buzzed with a high whine that drilled into the skull if you listened too long. Sarah sat down. Her wrists still ached where the cuffs had pinched too tight. She flexed her hands slowly, watching the skin around her wrists turn red, then purple. The sting came in waves, but she didn't let her face move. That habit, keeping her expression neutral, had been trained into her over decades. It was armor. And yet, in the quiet between the buzzing light and the distant footsteps, her mind kept drifting back to the ICU waiting room, her mother's blanket on her lap, the smell of coffee, the second hand of the clock dragging forward like it was pulling her by the throat. Sarah checked her breathing like she was in court, and someone had just said something outrageous. Inhale, hold, exhale, keep your voice steady, keep your mind clear. But this wasn't court. This was the part of the system most people only learn about when it's too late, the part where your identity doesn't matter until someone decides to confirm it. Time moved strangely. Minutes stretched, then vanished. The light never changed. There were no windows. She could hear voices, sometimes laughing, arguing, a muffled cry, then silence again. At some point, she lay back on the bench. The metal was cold through her hoodie. The air smelled like disinfectant and something sour underneath it, like the building never truly dried. She closed her eyes, and her mind betrayed her with another memory. Her mother's hand shaking during that traffic stop when Sarah was 12. Evelyn's voice steady while humiliation burned in her eyes. This is why, Sarah thought, this is why she became who she became, because nobody should feel that powerless. And now here she was, powerless anyway. At 4:32 a.m., footsteps stopped outside her cell. A corrections officer appeared at the bars. He didn't look at her when he spoke, like his eyes had been trained not to connect. Phone. Sarah stood, joints stiff from the cold, and followed him down a narrow hallway to a wall-mounted phone. The receiver was worn smooth from 1,000 desperate hands. She picked it up. A woman's voice came through, strained, professional, cracked at the edges. Nurse Jacobs, Piedmont, Atlanta. I'm so sorry to bother you. Sarah's throat tightened instantly. She knew the tone. She'd heard it in court when someone's attorney called to say a client had died. She'd heard it in the ICU when doctors tried to soften the edges of reality. The nurse apologized first, automatic hollow, then said the words that mattered. Miss Blacksmith, Your mother passed at 4:09 a.m. For a moment, Sarah's mind did something strange. It tried to reject the sentence like it was a bad piece of evidence. It tried to find a procedural error, a technicality, a reason it couldn't be true. But grief doesn't care about procedure. The hallway tilted. Sarah gripped the receiver until her knuckles whitened. Her chest felt too tight to fill. Her eyes burned, but the tears still wouldn't come, like her body refused to give her even that release. She managed one word, barely audible: thanks. The call ended. She stood there holding dead air for a second longer than she should have, then slowly placed the receiver back on the hook. The corrections officer guided her back to the cell as if she was still just a detainee, as if the worst sentence of her life hadn't just been delivered. Through a dirty plastic handset, Sarah sat on the bench and stared at the concrete floor. Her mother's face was vivid behind her eyelids, Valen smiling at graduation, Evelyn singing in church, Evelyn counting pennies at the kitchen table so Sarah could buy textbooks without worrying. And now Evelyn was gone, while Sarah was locked in a box, because two deputies decided it was funny to laugh at a black woman holding federal credentials at 2 a.m. The fluorescent light buzzed above her like a relentless insect. She didn't scream, she didn't beg, she didn't pound on the bars. She just sat there, very still, while grief settled over her like weight. At 6:15 a.m., another officer arrived. Release paperwork. That was it. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement that something catastrophic had happened inside this building while a woman with a dying mother was being held for suspicious activity. Her credentials had been verified. Verified by who? A supervisor, a clerk. Someone finally called the number Sarah offered at the gas station. It didn't matter. The fact remained. The system could confirm the truth whenever it wanted. It simply hadn't wanted to quickly enough. Sarah collected her belongings, signed the release form with a pen that barely wrote. The ink looked faint, like a signature that didn't fully belong to her. Then she walked out into the gray pre-dawn cold. Her car was gone, towed. The impound fee was $175, paid with the same credit card she'd used to buy gas hours earlier. Like the entire night had been stamped into a single cruel loop. She drove home in silence, the sunrise bleeding red and orange across the horizon like the sky itself had been cut open. When she got inside, she collapsed onto the couch without undressing. No shower, no food, no phone calls. Just her body hitting the cushions like it finally ran out of things to hold up. Her phone buzzed at 9:43 a.m. Chief Judge Raymond Foster, Northern District of Georgia. Sarah stared at the screen for a second, then answered with a voice that didn't match the inside of her chest. Judge Blacksmith. Foster's tone was urgent. Clipped. Judicial business doesn't pause for grief. Ellison had a stroke. We need coverage Monday morning. Civil rights case. It has press. It can't move. Sarah listened without speaking, her free hand pressing against her forehead like she could hold her head together. Foster continued. You're the only available magistrate. A pause. Then he read the caption out. He was reading any other file number. Malik Fatah versus Forsyth County Sheriff's Department. Defendants, Deputy Dominic Augustine and Deputy John Mueller. Sarah didn't move, didn't blink. Just felt her hand tighten around the phone. Foster hesitated, finally sensing what he'd stepped into. Sarah, can you handle this? For the first time since the Circle K, Sarah let herself inhale fully, slow, controlled, like she was about to speak on the record. Yes, she said. No tremor, no anger, no softness. The same steady voice she used at the gas station. The same steady voice she used in the holding cell. The same steady voice she used on the phone with a nurse who told her mother was gone. I can handle it. And in that quiet living room while the day continued outside like nothing had happened, Sarah Blacksmith made a decision that would turn to deputies' laughter into the most expensive mistake of their careers. Monday morning arrived cold and gray, the kind of Georgia morning where the sky looks like wet concrete and every sound feels sharper than it should. Sarah Blacksmith entered the Forsyth County Superior Court through the judge's entrance at 7:45 a.m. Her robe was pressed and immaculate. Her hair was pinned back into its usual neat bun. Her face was composed, no swelling from crying, no visible crack in the mask. If anyone looked at her walking those polished hallways, they would see what they expected to see, a federal magistrate judge, prepared, professional, unshakable. They would not see the cell light buzzing in her memory. They would not see the phone receiver in her hand at 4:32 a.m. They would not see her mother's name echoing behind her eyes like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. The courthouse smelled like old wood and floor polish. It was the kind of building that had watched decades of justice attempted, delivered, withheld, and negotiated. Reporters were already there. Community members packed the hallway. Activists clustered near the front steps. Cameras turned toward every movement like they could catch the truth if they filmed enough of it. The case had drawn attention even before Sarah's name entered the story. Malik Fatah v. Forsyth County Sheriff's Department. Excessive force, wrongful arrest, civil rights violations. The plaintiff, Malik Fatah, was a 23-year-old Somali immigrant and college student. The defendants were two deputies with reputations that followed them like exhaust Dominic Augustine and John Mueller. Sarah walked into the courtroom and took her seat behind the bench. The court reporter adjusted her machine. The bailiff stood ready. Attorneys shuffled papers, whispering last-minute strategies like prayers. At exactly 8 a.m., Sarah looked out over the packed room and called the matter on the record. Her voice was controlled, steady, neutral, every syllable placed where it belonged. Before opening statement, she made a disclosure. 36 hours ago, Sarah said, I was arrested by the defendants in this case, Deputy Dominic Augustine and Deputy John Moulart, a gas station in Forsyth County. The courtroom reacted instantly, not with shouting, but with a collective intake of breath that sounded like wind rushing through a door crack. Heads turned, pens paused midair. Reporters leaned forward as if their bodies could pull the words closer. Sarah continued without hesitation. The arrest was made without probable cause. I was detained, booked, and released after my judicial credentials were verified. A murmur spread like fire through dry grass. People looked at each other like they were confirming they heard it correctly. Activists stiffened in their seats. The plaintiff's counsel, Rebecca Thorne, didn't smile, but her eyes sharpened. The defense attorney, thin, pale, in an ill-fitting suit, went still, as if his spine had suddenly turned to ice. Sarah's expression did not change. She cited precedent. She referenced the legal standards governing recusal. She explained clearly, methodically, that a prior negative interaction with defendants did not automatically require disqualification if the judge could remain impartial. She noted that transparency was required, and that the record would reflect her disclosure. Then she invited objections. Defense counsel stood slowly, like a man climbing onto a stage he didn't want. Your Honor, he began, we move for recusal based on conflict of interest, the appearance of impropriety. It was the standard argument, predictable, necessary, almost automatic. Sarah denied the motion. Her reasoning was clean, anchored in case law and procedure. No emotion, no personal commentary, just the law. The motion is denied, she said. The trial will proceed at 8:15 a.m. The side door opened. Dominic Augustine and John Mueller entered in dress uniforms, badges polished, shoes gleaming, medals aligned. They walked with the confidence of men who had faced complaints before and watched them dissolve. Men who believed the system was built to cushion them even when it scolded them. They stepped into view. And then they saw her. Augustine stopped mid-stride like someone had yanked a chain around his ankle. The color drained from his face, the ruddy complexion turning pale and waxy. His jaw tightened. His eyes widened just a fraction, but enough to show panic underneath the training. Mueller froze behind him. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again as if his body forgot how to do simple things. Recognition hit them like a freight train. The woman at the Circle K, the woman they laughed at. The woman they handcuffed while she begged them to verify her credentials. The woman they booked on false charges while her mother died. She was wearing the robe. Sarah met their eyes with the same calm expression she had worn when Augustine blasted the flashlight into her face. No anger, no triumph, no satisfaction, just the neutral professional gaze of a judge prepared to do her job. The deputies sat at the defense table like their bodies had become too heavy to move naturally. Their earlier confidence didn't vanish. With drama, it collapsed quietly, folding inward like a cheap chair. Jury selection began. By 10:30 a.m., 12 jurors were seated at women, 4 men, 7 white, 3 black, 2 Somali immigrants, ordinary citizens pulled into a case that now carried an extraordinary shadow. Rebecca Thorne delivered the plaintiff's opening statement with a surgeon's precision. She walked the jury through the basics: a traffic stop on March 15th of the previous year, Malik Fatah driving home from a grocery store shift, an alleged broken taillight, a sudden escalation, deputies yanking him out of the car, forcing him face down on the pavement, a knee on his back, arms wrenched, cuffs biting, injuries serious enough to require hospitalization. She described a pattern stops and arrests disproportionately targeting black and Somali residents in Forsyth County. Charges that didn't stick, reports that didn't match what witnesses saw, fear that spread through immigrant communities like disease. Then defense counsel stood and delivered the familiar script: officer safety, split-second decisions, compliance issues, standard procedure. It sounded polished. It sounded reasonable. But the room didn't lean toward him the way it had before. At 11:15 a.m., Malik Fatah took the stand. He was slight and soft-spoken. His English carried an accent, but his words were clear. He described the flashing lights behind him, the immediate fear that grabbed his throat, the kind of fear immigrant communities pass down like warnings. He said he pulled over quickly. He kept his hands visible. He answered every question. He produced his license, registration, insurance. Augustine asked where he was coming from, where he was going, why he was in that neighborhood. Malik answered calmly. Augustine ordered him out of the car. Malik complied. The pat-down was rough, aggressive, humiliating. Malik flinched from the force, not as resistance, but as reflex. Augustine interpreted it as resistance anyway. Mueller moved in. Between them, they forced Malik face down. Augustine's knee pressed into Malik's back. Mueller yanked Malik's arms upward, hard, until pain shot through his shoulders like electricity. Malik's head struck the asphalt. He felt the world blur. The injuries were not minor: a fractured rib, contusions, concussion. The arrest report claimed Malik resisted and assaulted an officer. All charges were dropped 3 weeks later. Rebecca Thorne introduced evidence methodically. Dashcam footage. Grainy but clear enough to show Malik complying and the deputies escalating. Medical records, dates, x-rays, documented injuries. Photographs, bruising, swelling, abrasions, witness testimony, other Somali residents describing similar stops, similar tactics, similar vague charges. By early afternoon, the pattern wasn't just suggested, it was building a shape the jury could see. And then, at 2:30 p.m., during a brief recess, something walked into the courtroom that nobody expected. A man in a Waffle House uniform approached the plaintiff's table. He introduced himself as Douglas Reed, night cook, and he said 4 words that made the air change. "I have footage." Douglas Reed didn't look like someone trying to be a hero. He looked like someone who had simply gotten tired of watching the same kind of thing happen and hearing it explained away afterward. A night cook, Waffle House uniform, hands that smelled like fryer oil and coffee, eyes that had seen too many late-night police stops from across parking lots. "I have footage," he repeated, quieter this time, as if saying it too loud might invite someone to take it away. Rebecca Thorne's posture changed immediately, subtle but unmistakable. She asked him what kind of footage. He said a Ring doorbell camera outside the Waffle House caught what happened at the Circle K across the lot. The defense objected the second the words Ring footage entered the air. Relevance, prejudice, improper character evidence. Sarah didn't react, not outwardly. She simply requested to review the proffer in chambers. Minutes later, inside the quiet private room behind the bench, the screen lit up. A wide-angle view of the lot. The Circle K glowing in harsh white. Sarah's Mercedes at pump 7. 2 deputies approaching, flashlight beams spearing into the darkness. Sarah holding up her credentials. Augustine's body language shifting into mockery. Mueller grinning. Then the cuffs. Then the walk to the patrol car. And then the moment that made the entire case snap into focus like a lens turning sharp. Augustine and Mueller celebrating a clean, crisp high five, like they'd just pulled off a prank, not ruined a life. Sarah watched without blinking. Not because it didn't hurt, but because her face was trained not to give pain the satisfaction of being visible. When the attorneys returned to the courtroom, Sarah ruled the footage admissible. The defense snapped up. "Your Honor, this is highly prejudicial." "It is prejudicial," Sarah said evenly. "And it is also probative. Under the rules of evidence, the footage established pattern, intent, motive, absence of mistake. It wasn't being admitted to embarrass. It was being admitted because it showed the way these deputies behaved when they believed no one important was watching." At 3 p.m., the video played on the courtroom monitors. The gallery fell silent. People watched Sarah, now seated in her robe, being treated like an inconvenience at best, a joke at worst. They watched her credentials ignored, her calm voice dismissed. They watched her hands placed on the vehicle. They watched Muller's hands pat her down. Then they watched the high five. A few jurors reacted physically. One tightened his jaw so hard the muscle jumped. A woman shook her head slowly, like her mind refused to accept what her eyes were being forced to see. Someone in the back whispered, "Oh my God," like a prayer. The defense attorney didn't look at the screen. He stared at the table, lips pressed thin, as if he could outlast the moment by pretending it wasn't happening. Rebecca Thorne stood. Plaintiff calls Deputy John Mueller as an adverse witness. Mueller walked to the stand like each step cost him something. He swore in, voice tight. His dress uniform looked suddenly too stiff, too polished, like a costume that didn't fit the body inside it anymore. On direct, defense counsel tried to keep it simple. Standard procedures, officer safety, reasonable suspicion. The same phrases every jury had heard 100 times. Then Thorne rose for cross-examination. She didn't attack immediately. She built the foundation brick by brick, the way good trial lawyers do when they want the collapse to be unavoidable. "Deputy Mueller, you're trained on Fourth Amendment standards, correct?" "Yes." "Probable cause requirements?" "Yes." "Body camera policy?" "Yes." She moved to the Malik fader stop. The alleged broken taillight, the escalation, the taped out, the injuries. She played the dashcam footage again and again in small pieces, pausing at key moments. "Where is Mr. Fater resisting here?" Mueller hesitated. "Answer the question." I believed he was believed," Thorne repeated, letting the word hang like smoke. "You believed, but what does the video show?" Mueller's face reddened. Then Thorne introduced the bodycam footage. Mueller's bodycam footage that had been submitted, corrupted. She let that land before she spoke again. "Deputy, were you aware digital forensics recovered the original file?" Mueller blinked hard. The courtroom held its breath. The recovered footage played. It showed Malik compliant. It showed the force clearly. It showed Augustine's knee pinning Malik down. It showed Mueller wrenching Malik's arms upward. It showed the kind of pain you can't fake even if you wanted to. Thorne didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Deputy Mueller, did you delete or corrupt footage in this case?" Mueller swallowed. His eyes flicked toward Augustine just once, then back forward. Yes. A tremor went through the room. Reporters' pens moved like they were trying to keep up with history. Thorne kept going. "Was this the first time you deleted footage?" Mueller's voice got smaller. "No." "How many times?" Silence. Sarah leaned forward slightly, not threatening, not emotional, just present. "Deputy," she said, "you are under oath." Mueller exhaled, like air leaving a punctured tire. "More than once," he admitted. "I don't know." "Several." Thorne pivoted. Why? Mueller's shoulders tensed. Because it was easier. Easier than what? Easier than pushing back. The jury watched him like they were watching a damn crack. Thorne asked about unofficial expectations numbers, stops, arrests, pressure to justify patrols in certain neighborhoods, stops targeting black residents and Somali immigrants. Muller's face flushed deeper, his answers turned halting, evasive. Then Thorne asked the question that mattered most. Deputy Mueller, when you arrested Judge Blacksmith at the Circle K, did you know who she was? Muller's mouth opened, closed, opened again, and then the truth came out. Yes, a sound rippled through the courtroom, half gasp, half disgust. Thorne didn't pounce. She let the admission breathe. You recognized her credentials. Yes, and you arrested her anyway. Muller's eyes dropped. Yes, why? Muller's voice cracked at the edges. Because Augustine laughed it off, because a black woman at a gas station at 2 in the morning couldn't possibly be a federal judge. That sentence landed like a hammer. It wasn't just misconduct anymore. It wasn't just a bad night, a misunderstanding, a sloppy arrest. It was what it had always been: contempt, dressed up as discretion. Thorne took one more step. Deputy Mueller, has Deputy Augustine ever said anything about who belongs in Forsyth County? Mueller hesitated. Then he said something nobody expected to hear. He referenced Augustine's father, former Sheriff Daniel Augustine, his legacy, his reputation, and stories that circulated like folklore in the department. Incidents in the past. People detained on vague charges. Immigrant families leaving town soon after. And then he mentioned a name tied to Sarah's own family history: her grandmother Amina Blacksmith, wrongfully detained decades earlier by Daniel Augustine. The courtroom erupted. Sarah gavelled for order, voice cutting through the noise with steady authority. The revelation went on the record. She ruled it did not require recusal. She would apply the law to the evidence. The trial would continue. When Dominic Augustine took the stand the next morning, he tried to regain control, officers' safety, split-second decisions, standard lines. But under Thorne's cross, he frayed. She confronted him with statistics. Stop rates and arrest rates broken down by race and ethnicity. Disparities too large to explain away with vague claims. She confronted him with the ring footage. She confronted him with Muller's confession. And then, with the jury watching, she asked directly, Deputy Augustine, why did you treat Malik Fader as suspicious? Beyond the taillight, Augustine's voice rose, his jaw clenched. Nervous behavior, not maintaining eye contact. Body language. Thorne played the dashcam again. Slow, Malik calm, hands visible, compliant. Augustine snapped, and in that snap, the truth slipped out. Certain people don't belong in Forsyth County, he said, louder than he meant to. Not unless they've got a damn good reason to be there. The courtroom went dead silent. Even Augustine seemed to realize what he'd said. He tried to pivot, to soften it, to reframe. But the words were already captured by the court reporter, already absorbed by the jury, already tattooed onto the case. To eliminate any argument of bias, Sarah made an unusual procedural decision. She temporarily stepped down while a senior judge presided over her testimony about her own arrest. It was clean, transparent, beyond reproach. Sarah testified with surgical precision: the gas station, the credentials, the dismissal, the cuffs, the booking, the holding cell, the phone call, the moment she learned her mother died while she was detained. Defense counsel suggested grief might have affected her perception. Sarah answered calmly. The credential photo existed. Arrest records had timestamps, ring footage corroborated. Her testimony didn't wobble. Closing arguments began at 2 p.m. Thorne tied the entire pattern together: Moloch's injuries, the videos, corrupted bodycam evidence, racial disparities, Muller's admissions, Augustine's statement about who belongs, and the constitutional guarantees trampled under boots and laughter. The defense leaned on officer safety and excuses that felt thin against video and confession. At 4:15 p.m., the jury went out. They returned at 5:30 p.m., 1 hour and 15 minutes, unanimous liability on all counts. Excessive force, false arrest, civil rights violations, deliberate indifference extending to the department. Damages $15 million. The gallery erupted. Sarah called for order, but she didn't crush the moment. Some things deserved to be acknowledged. Then she issued remedial measures: an independent civilian accountability board with subpoena power, mandatory anti-bias training with specific modules on immigrant rights and constitutional protections, upgraded body cameras with tamper-proof storage and automatic upload, severe penalties for corruption or deletion of footage, immediate termination of Augustine and Mueller, criminal referrals to the U.S. Attorney for civil rights violations. 3 months later, Sarah stood at her mother's grave and placed Daisy Zavellin's favorite tat at the base of a simple headstone. She thought of her grandmother. She thought of Malik applying to law school. She thought of the Circle K lot, where laughter turned into consequences. Justice wasn't a destination. It was a practice, daily, deliberate, demanding, and for the first time in Forsyth County, the system was being forced to practice it in the open.